following the IOC's decision to give individual sports the autonomy to make their own rules regarding the participation of trans athletes in sport recently. They have now been urged to make the rules clearer themselves for events such as the Olympics and the World Championships, as no one really knows what the rules are. Today, we're discussing the Olympics being urged to improve guidelines around transgender athletes, so stay with us. First up, let's have a quick look at what's been going on recently. The issue of trans rights in sports came to a head recently when Leah Thomas, a transgender swimmer out of University of Pennsylvania, set multiple records throughout last year's swim season. Criticism came after prominent swimmers such as Michael Phelps and even some of Thomas's own teammates came out in opposition of Thomas seemingly making a mockery of biological women's swimming records. Conservative news outlets as well as more central commentators have suggested that the idea of a biological male racing against biological females simply isn't fair for biological women, as Thomas and others like her possess an unfair advantage. A recent ruling has meant that unless trans swimmers transition before puberty, then they won't be able to compete in the women's game, which seems fair enough to most people given the fact that men and women are built differently, and if a biological male athlete races against a biological female athlete in most sports, the biological male athlete will win the vast majority of the time. Thomas countered the ruling by saying, "The very simple answer is that I'm not a man, I'm a woman, so I belong on the women's team. Trans people deserve that same respect that every other athlete gets." Where do you stand on the Leah Thomas issue? Let us know your thoughts below. Next up, we're discussing the Olympics. Stay with us. Francisco Ricci Betti, the former tennis player who now presides over the Association of Summer Olympics International Federation, has come out this week and suggested that Olympics chiefs need to improve their guidelines surrounding transgender athletes taking part in women's events. He believes clearer guidance is needed, as at the moment, no one seems to know what is going on. Betti has also suggested that we should include input from scientists following reports that the IOC had issued a framework which simply didn't include expert opinion. Betti was quoted as saying, "The human rights approach says the transgender woman should be free to live a normal life. This is completely true, of course, but perhaps not in the elite professional side of sport. Many international federations believe that inclusion is a right which should be afforded to transgender athletes, but these views are vastly outnumbered by those who oppose it and mostly comes in support of biological women, not in opposition of trans women. However, scientists should, of course, have their say, as there is no fairer way to regulate this than having experts provide their opinions." Betti went on to say, "I believe the most recent guidelines are too evasive, and therefore we have to improve them, or otherwise we lose the levels of competitiveness." Betti's recent remarks make him the most senior figure to question the IOC's framework, but if it means we get a fairer and safer sport, we should get behind him. What do you guys think? So, what else do we know? Let's see. Well, Betti thinks that those who make the rules need to have a clearer guidance when setting those rules. Requirements which were put forward last year said that the transgender athletes no longer needed to suppress their testosterone levels to within 5 nanomoles per liter 12 months directly before an event. The framework also suggested that governing bodies shouldn't assume that trans athletes have an advantage without evidence. But this is simply ridiculous. It's clearly obvious that biological men hold a speed and power advantage over biological women, but the framework also went on to claim that athletes should be able to compete in their preferred gender category as long as it doesn't compromise fairness, which doesn't make sense to a lot of people, as fairness is obviously going to be compromised. The framework was quite rightly criticized by female rights groups and scientists, who made the incredibly obvious point that anyone who goes through male puberty has a clear advantage. The same groups also criticized the IOC for leaving the decision to individual sporting bodies, as a lot of these less popular sports have the resources to actually fund a study. It is also thought that FIFA, football's world governing body, have broadened an external consultation on the issue in a bid to make their sport more fair as well. And what else did Betti have to say? Stay tuned to find out. The Italian has clearly been rattled by the issue, and speaking at a conference in Rome recently, he spoke of how we need to come up with ways to make sports fairer, whilst also maximizing inclusion. He went on to say, two of the concepts are totally incompatible in many sports, inclusion and fairness. At the top, sport is not inclusive. When you beat someone, you screw them over. And he is correct. Equality of outcome is completely different to equality of effort, except when you put biological men against biological women, as a different amount of effort is required for the former to beat the latter. Some Olympic sports are known to be reviewing their policies, from rowing to triathlon to hockey, but hopefully sense prevails here, as these sports, like most others, reward the stronger athletes. Where FIFA is concerned, they have reportedly prioritized inclusion, but are thought to be consulting sports scientists, which will surely only tell us what we all know anyway. Biddy finished by saying, "We want to work with the IOC to get a more solid set of guidelines. What we expect is a little more definition. The human rights approach says the transgender woman should be free to live a normal life. This is true, but perhaps not in elite sport." Whatever happens, it seems as though sport in general is coming to its senses and is seemingly ready to give women's sports back to biological women. Where do you stand on this? Elsewhere, a federal judge has blocked a presidential directive. Stay with us. Following President Biden sanctioning a new directive which allows trans athletes to compete in the gender which corresponds to their personal gender identity, a judge has this week put the block on the nonsensical directive. Judge Charles Ashley Jr., who presides over Eastern Tennessee, is a Trump appointee, which will obviously bring more scrutiny into the ruling, with most people seeing this as a Trump versus Biden or Republican versus Democrat issue, when it's neither of these things. The issue concerns protecting biological women's records and not making a complete mockery of all they have achieved throughout history. The judge in question ruled that Title IX from Biden's administration would have made it impossible for some states to enforce rules which limit the participation of trans athletes in women's sports. The ruling, thankfully, also includes trans athletes using the same bathrooms and changing facilities as young girls and women, which is obviously the right thing to do. Ashley said that states cannot continue regulating pursuant to their state's laws while simultaneously complying with defendants' guidance, after 20 in-office Republicans filed a lawsuit against the government last year. They weren't happy that national directives would conflict with their own state laws, as well as a potential loss of funding. The judge was asked to dismiss this case by the defendants, the Justice Department, the Department of Education, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, but that was thrown out. Sense prevails. And finally, another kick in the teeth for biological women. Stay with us. Earlier this week, it was revealed that the University of Pennsylvania has nominated Leah Thomas for the 2022 NCAA Woman of the Year award. The university set their stall out to show the world just how anti-biological female they actually are by nominating Thomas, who was the subject of a huge debate earlier this year. Thomas found international fame, or infamy, after absolutely blitzing the women's 500-yard freestyle by a record 38 seconds. To completely vindicate her detractors who have claimed her racing against biological women is completely unfair. Thomas competed on the men's team before transitioning and was ranked 554th in the 200-meter freestyle, 65th in the 500-meter freestyle, and 32nd in the 1650-meter freestyle. Her opponents claimed that she was only moving across so that she could actually be competitive, and whilst this argument seems pretty unfair, she quite obviously now has a clear advantage over the female field. 577 graduate student athletes were nominated, and the winner will be announced next January, which will be decided by the Woman of the Year election committee. What do you guys make of all of this? Do you think Thomas should be eligible for the Woman of the Year award? Let us know what you think below, and if you're an NCAA fan, tell us who you think should win the award. As usual, thanks for joining us today, and remember to stop by again next time for some more fun and games. And why not do us a favor by liking today's video, as well as sharing it with any sports fans you might have lurking on those social media accounts. Bye guys!